Let's be honest, trust can make or break an organization. It's the invisible currency that determines whether people follow your lead or quietly check out. In leadership, trust is everything. Today on the Lead with Hope podcast, we're diving deep into this essential ingredient for lasting success with someone who's made it his life's work to study, measure, and strengthen it, Dr. Toby Travis. Dr. Travis is an international leadership consultant, author of Trust Ed, The Bridge to School Improvement, and a leading voice on how trust impacts organizational culture, performance, and well-being. Together, we'll unpack what it really means to build trust, why it starts at the top, and how it grows or crumbles in everyday interactions, and how leaders can create schools and workplaces where trust fuels growth, engagement, and yes, you guessed it, hope.
Before we jump in, a quick thank you to Craig Williams, founder of Conversary, our legacy partner. If you have ever felt like your story, your message, or your brand needs clarity, Conversary exists to help you with exactly that. They work with people who want their voice to reflect their values and their purpose. You can find their link in today's show notes and on the Spark Hope website. Thanks to Conversary for their belief in the power of story to create connection, clarity, and hope.
And now, welcome to this episode of the Lead with Hope podcast. Let's get started.
One of my favorite questions, Toby, on the show is when I get an opportunity to hear about my guests, their story. So let's start there. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah. Well, I've been around for years, so there's a lot of story to tell. And maybe that's, I think, part of maybe the uniqueness of my journey has been very different throughout the seasons of my life. Grew up in a very rural country setting and then being, working internationally. And, so I have friends still who've not left the county. And so, that's a bit of my story, and actually was involved in youth ministry for many years. That was also a big part of my story. And then I was in entertainment for years, and that was a big part of my story. And actually, a lot of that time, the productions that I was a part of mostly were performances on school campuses. And it's really interesting how years later, that knowledge of seeing all these hundreds, maybe thousands of schools and their operations has actually helped kind of feed a lot of creative thinking about how to approach things differently when it comes to education. Obviously transitioned into an education career and as a teacher and then as an administrator and a consultant and a writer, and lots of different phases. And kind of a unique pathway into education, but very, very grateful to God for all those different phases of.
It's fascinating when you think about our journeys, because I don't know about you, but I had this roadmap in my mind. And I was going to I was going to be a school social worker for the first 10 years. And then I was going to go into administration and stay at that same school until retirement. The old saying is, you make plans and God laughs, because his plan for our lives is oftentimes much bigger and much greater than we can even imagine. And we know that gratitude helps us to foster that sense of hope that I love to talk about. And so I guess what I want to ask you now is, what are some things that are bringing you joy in your life right now? Some of this, maybe the small things.
It's always people. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, a thought that I had on your previous question, but it connects to this, when I'm leading a training or professional development or whatever for school administrators, one of the questions I'd love to ask is, how many of you, it was your plan, it was your hope, your direction when you were in college or graduate school that you would be a school administrator? And almost no one raises their hands. And then you hear people, it's like, well, then how did you get here? So when I see where I'm at today, it was never part of the plan. And yet to find so much fulfillment, so much that comes back to affirm that, no, this is what God has for me and the impact it's having on the lives of not just myself, but the people I get to interact with. And so yeah, what brings me hope and gratitude is just watching how God works through relationships in unexpected ways. And yeah, that's what I moved from. Had been in ministry years ago. I was in youth ministry, and one of the things that got me so excited about Christian education was, even for a short time, I was an associate pastor, and I might get 2 hours a week of contact time with my kids. And when I transitioned into Christian education and realized, oh my goodness, and interacting with these kids all day long, 5 days a week. And then in a couple of opportunities, I've been able to work with boarding programs. And I've got these kids literally every waking hour of the day. The opportunity for impact is phenomenal, and just, again, very grateful to God for those opportunities.
Yeah. And when I reflect back on my journey, the times that I felt most purposeful and most grounded, grateful, it's when I could connect with the kids. I loved going into the cafeteria and just talking to them, seeing what they had going on in their lives and what they were looking forward to. Toby, as you reflect on your journey, are there any lessons or maybe experiences you want to share from your life and leadership?
I think watching communities and cultures intentionally get to a better place. I think that's so. It's both reflecting on. There's been, every community, whether it's in a school community or church community or business community, there's drama, right?
Yeah.
It's because we got people. Yeah, if you got a campus of 500-600 kids, well, then you've got 100 or 200 adult staffers, and then you've got 1,200 parents and grandparents, and you throw those people into the mix, you got people, you got challenges. I think when I think through, okay, what are some specific times where I've again garnered hope and I'm grateful, is when communities have chosen to bond and to gather around shared values to get to a desired end. There's a lot of schools and organizations that talk about being mission centered, and it's hard work. But when they really do it, it does change communities. And let me give you a very specific example. I remember coming into a school environment that you could not label anything other than toxic. And the more I got into it, the more I realized, oh my goodness, there's just a lot of broken people here and hurt feelings. And one of the practices I saw that was being allowed and that went on in that culture was just bashing people through text and no control about where these text or emails went, and just people saying awful, horrendous things in capital letters, and sharing their grievance with the world. And I was invited into the administration of that team. And one of the very first things I said, hey, we've got to set the bar higher here on how we communicate with each other in this community. And so we talked about putting together, and we put together a new policy as part of we updated our grievance policy as well, but we just said, electronic communication is for information only, and that you are not and we will not participate in any grievance or any kind of complaint or frustration. Now, you can document your grievance, your frustration, you should document things, but email is not, and text messaging is not the instrument to do that. And we will not communicate with each other in that way any longer. Boom. Well, we set that stand. And what was interesting is everyone resonated with the policy. Everybody agreed. They're like, yes, yes. And literally, you could tell a sense of improvement in just the behavior of everybody and just this general work environment. Literally within weeks, you could see how people were treating each other better. So again, it's one little small example, but it's when you intentionally live out your values, so, and that's how we came to that, was we value each other. We value personal conversation and communication. And we also saw the damage of what electronic communication can be. And we took action on it, and it was transformative. And every school I've worked in since That's been a foundation. One of our protocols or our norms is email us for information for issues.
And it takes courage. It takes a lot of courage for administrators to acknowledge that and then set that expectation through policy and then follow through and follow that policy and hold people accountable. And I believe people want that, but the process of getting there is not always pleasant.
Well, no, but you've got to give people voice. So, even, I think back how we got there was, no, we talked about the elephant in the room.
Mhm.
So in faculty and staff meetings, we said, hey, this is what I'm observing or we're observing. And we'd really like to see a solution to this. So it wasn't a mandate
Right.
from the administration. It was a conversation with faculty and staff about, hey, does everybody recognize this problem? And I mean, hands went up and conversations, it was like, duh. And so it really was a community agreeing, hey, let's hold ourselves accountable. Let's behave
Yeah.
and let's treat each other professionally and respectfully. And that there are appropriate ways to deal with our frustrations. Boom,
Right.
that again, it really was transformational.
Yeah. Ownership. Everybody taking ownership there. That is definitely transformational. Now, I talk about a system of hope being habits, optimistic mindset, purpose, and excellence. And today I'm going to have a coaching cohort session where we're talking about purpose, and core values is one of the topics on the agenda. When you think about core values in an organization, can you link that to a school leader's values and the organizational values and the importance therein?
Oh, absolutely. And as I think you're aware, that was my doctoral work was in trusted leadership. And so we look deeply at the connection between basically skill sets, competencies, behaviors of leaders, and what builds or what erodes trust. And I use an illustration in my book of a bridge. And actually, I have to give my wife always full credit for that. She came up with the illustration.
You're a very smart man to do that.
I had finished my dissertation. I had all this material, and I remember I was invited to do one of my first trainings after I'd finished that work. And I was like, there's too much here. I need a visual picture of what this all looks like. And Tanya goes, well, isn't it just like a bridge? You need all these components working together for people to trust you. And I'm like, yeah, that's brilliant. And so I went back and actually I spent about 3 months reading everything I get my hands on about bridge construction and then look for corollaries. But very quickly, so I talk about the foundation of the bridge of trust. Leadership is our beliefs, our values. And the substructure of the bridge is that supporting and connecting everything we do to our beliefs and our values. And here's what I found in the research. Trust is most frequently broken when our actions, right? When what we say, what we do, our protocols, our programs are not in alignment with who we say we are or what we say we believe. Take it to a school setting. School leaders, administrators, owners in a private school setting, they say teachers are our highest value, right? We know teachers are the essence of the school. They are our highest value. And that's a stated belief or a core value. But then the substructure, you start looking at their policies. You start looking at basically how much are they being an advocate then for teachers and the teacher world. And if that's not in place, well, they're not going to be trusted, right? If you say teachers are my highest value, but as administrator, I've not taken any active work to ensure they have competitive compensation and packages and resources and processing everything I do by how does this impact teachers, then no, I'm not being trusted. So there's a direct correlation to beliefs and values and the level of trust.
Yeah. What would you say about the turnover in administration? In Illinois here, the IPA has put out some information about every 4 years, a principal changes. With that frequent turnover, how does that affect trust?
Well, and this is why mission, vision, values, priorities, they have to be articulated. They have to be real. When we recruit an administrator, it needs to be in alignment with those elements. Often the reason, well, in fact, I know we can probably look at numerous studies. The number one reason those administrators are not staying is because they don't feel supported by their leadership. And when you drill down into what is it that's not being supported? Well, again, it's this misalignment of who we say we are and what we're actually doing.
Mhm.
And so you've got to go back and be sure. One of the exercises I do for schools, Brandi, is take a look at their operation manuals or their student and parent handbooks, and just go through your handbooks and your policy manuals and look to see, is there anything in here that is based on the assumption of distrust? In other words, we have this policy because we don't trust our people. Well, that's a policy that's breeding a toxic work environment. And if you've got to have policies in place because you can't trust your employees, you've got the wrong employees. So it comes back to the HR, right? It goes back to the hiring at the very beginning and this is why, when I'm hiring, we spend a lot of time talking about mission, vision, values, and priorities. And is there alignment here? Because when there is alignment and it's real and you've got shared direction, so I'm sure you're familiar with Good to Great, Jim
Yeah.
Collins' work, right? When you're all on the same bus going the same direction, you're far more likely to have success in reaching that. But if you don't have the right people on the bus, then no, you need to get them off the bus.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
And we've all seen that image where, you got the boat on the water and you're rowing like crazy, but somebody's in the back of the boat drilling a hole in the boat, and it sounds like this mission, vision, values, all of this alignment is what it requires to get that boat headed downstream, going in the same direction, making that impact that we all want to make in education.
I frequently serve on accreditation teams, so I'll go in as part of a team and evaluating schools and campuses. And one of the standard questions that we receive as team members
Mhm.
for going in and doing those accreditation visits is part of our protocol is asking as many people as possible on campus, what's the mission of the school? And to see how many people, students, parents, employees, faculty, staff, admin can articulate the mission of the school. And what you invariably find, and the reason we do that practice is because when a community knows and understands and shares that vision, I know why I'm here, I know where we're going, and you're far more likely to actually make progress towards that goal. But when people don't know where they're headed, in the bridge illustration, that's basically the roadway of the bridge, is it should be very clear and simple, right? You want clear markings, you want to know what your lane is, and when you do, it's a straight shot to go from here to there on that deck of the bridge. But if there's potholes or if there aren't clear lanes, then it's hazardous. So that element of clear mission and direction critical to the health of any school.
Mhm. Yeah, Brene Brown says clear is kind. And I couldn't agree with that statement more, especially in schools. And in Illinois, we have over 850 school districts in Illinois. And so looking at that, a lot of those districts are rural. A lot of them are small. The district I most recently served in was just under 500 students. And some of the times, not always, but some of the times in those school districts, the systems, the processes, the procedures, they are at best rudimentary. And so I find that people, when those systems, processes, they're not in place, there's not that clarity. And people are working harder than they need to work. And so, in addition to being very clear about the mission and the vision and the values, what would you say about the systems, whether they're in place or not in a school district?
Well, you've probably heard the old saying, best practice must be contextualized, right? Where anybody who's credible in quality education today, we're fans of research-based best practice. I absolutely support that. However, it always has to be contextualized.
Mhm.
And what that looks like, though, is every school campus is unique.
Mhm.
And, you're articulating 800 and some districts, and I'm assuming we're just talking public sector, right? So, I mean, another 25% of the campuses in every state are also private campuses, right? So you've also got all these private schools that are going through these same issues. A very good friend of mine is a school superintendent for a large district, large state. And I think he's got 75 campuses within, his area of responsibility. And one of the things we've talked about is one of the great um, frustrations and really inappropriate approach to school development at the district level is making decisions at the district level. Because every school is unique, every campus is unique. To be able to, try to make these operational decisions up at this level and push them down, you're almost guaranteed that it's either just not going to work, or it's going to be frustration, or because there are unique. Every campus has unique demographics, from student body to community to faculty and staff, right? Every campus has unique resources, from physical to human. Every campus has, just every diversity that you can think about. And so when you're making operational decisions, they need to be processed at the campus level. You got to make those decisions at the closest level to who's actually implementing these. That's why, again, I go back to the illustration of the email policy, right? It was, no, you go back and you talk to the troops.
Yeah.
This is the challenge we're trying to remedy. What do you think that looks like here in this community? Those are the people who should be making those decisions and then pushing those recommendations up to the day. I get it. Somebody has to be in charge.
Right.
But how that gets processed has got to be processed at the most basic level of who actually is implementing these things.
Yeah. That's so true. So true. And again, like we were talking about before, the ownership piece. I mean, that's the only way you're going to have ownership, is if they are part of the process of
Right.
creating the solutions. And so important that they are part of the decision making.
And treat them like professionals.
Yeah.
We want teachers to be professionals, and then we don't treat them as professionals.
Yeah.
It's like we're shooting ourselves in the foot. It's like, no, we should be looking for opportunities for teacher autonomy.
Right.
Let them run. Let them do their thing. Often when I'm training principals and we'll talk about lesson plans, for example, one of my challenges to them is never require a lesson plan to be submitted that you're not going to look at and provide feedback on. If you're not going to actually provide feedback to the teacher on the lesson plan, there's absolutely no value in them submitting this to you. Now, there still may be value in them doing it, but it's like it just becomes busy work, and it's not meaningful. But those types of systems have become so ingrained in the daily operations, and again, based on distrust. Why do we force teachers to submit these plans? It's because we don't trust them to do their job.
Right.
Well, then you hired the wrong teacher.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So true. And when I was a principal at an early elementary center, my motto was the lesson plans are for the teachers, right? That the purpose of writing a lesson plan was for the teacher in the classroom. And it's not reasonable to expect that you're going to receive anywhere from 20 to 100 lesson plans and as one administrator review each and every one of them. So let's get rid of the busy work. There's no need for it. If there are cases where you need to, that's one thing. But I love the idea of only required if you're going to provide feedback on it.
Well, and you just brought up, again, one of the key challenges with traditional school models in their operations that really has to be resolved if you want to see teams excel. And that's what's called span of control. That was, again, part of my doctoral work years ago was looking at when does our efficiency and our effectiveness as leaders diminish? And you look at how many people can you effectively lead and support. I remember my first principalship, I had 46 direct reports, and I'd come out of kind of a corporate in a nonprofit sector where, maybe I had at tops a dozen people that I was supervising. And all of a sudden I've got to support 46 people to the right. Your example there is like, can I really regularly look at 46 lesson plans? No. So the most effective school operations I've seen is they have dispersed or distributed leadership to the greatest extent possible. What we found in the research on span of control is our effectiveness diminished after 6 to 10 people max that we're managing, right? Beyond that, we lose our effectiveness as leaders to support them. So then a great exercise for schools to look at is, hey, how do we distribute the leadership so that we've got teams working? You've got a lower elementary coordinator, upper elementary coordinator. You disperse and you empower those folks to lead in those smaller teams, and the effectiveness and the leveling engagement. That was another thing that we found.
Mhm.
Woo! It just goes really, really high.
Oh, that's powerful. I love that idea of empowering the leaders because we are building capacity when we're doing that. So that's beautiful.
Sustainability, Brandy,
Yeah.
and also
Yeah.
succession, right? So again, back to, we all know about the turnaround, right? So in
Mhm.
Illinois, you're saying principals are 4 years. I think the national stats are just a little over 3.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, we see this, and there's multiple reasons, I believe, of why that's going on, but also how do you address just sustainability and succession? Well, you got to be continually building up leaders, continually investing in those that are coming up.
Being intentional. Yeah, that's so important. And creating that next generation of leaders who are going to take over where we leave off. Because at the end of the day, we want our work to be continued. We want to create something, leave a legacy that is going to continue this work forward and help our students and education, and so it's very important to have that succession plan. Let's pause for just a moment because I want to tell you about a partner who truly aligns with the heart of this podcast, Conversary. Here on Lead with Hope, we talk a lot about clarity, clarity of purpose, clarity of voice, and clarity of direction. And that is exactly where Conversary comes in. They help leaders, educators, and change makers uncover the story behind their work and share it in a way that feels honest, meaningful, and deeply aligned with who they are. If you have ever felt the nudge to write a book, refine your message, or build a brand that actually reflects your values, not just your resume, Conversary doesn't rush you or box you in. They walk alongside you, helping you share your story with intention and integrity. You can learn more by clicking their link in the show notes or visiting them through the Spark Hope website. A big thank you to Craig Williams and Conversary for being a legacy sponsor of this podcast and for investing in stories that matter. Because when we share our stories, when we share them with clarity and with hope, real change happens. Can you share maybe a challenge or something that has been difficult in your leadership that has helped you to become the man you are today?
Actually, one I was just talking about with a friend of mine was reflecting back. We were talking about change management and how do you ensure, healthy movement towards whatever the end goal is. And I was reflecting back at a school where I had been invited to help lead the school into a kind of a new direction and a more fulfilled direction, again, tied to their values of being more inclusive and being more accessible. This was a private school setting. It was a middle upper class white school, excuse the expression, and yet they were not reflective of the community around them. And so we started some initiatives on everything. How do we increase our socio and economic and ethnic diversity of the school's makeup? And we took intentional plans for that. And what was interesting, I mean, this was being led by the board. I mean, this was board empowered. This is with the way we want to go. And I remember having numerous meetings with the faculty and staff and brainstorming on, what initiatives would look like. We started hiring and developing programs and looked for additional funding. And I thought we were all moving in the same direction.
Mhm.
And what I learned, because I got blindsided, um, the parking lot conversations were not
Yeah.
in support of this new direction of the school. And then within a couple of years' time, things were coming back to me that, people are saying, Dr. Travis is changing what this school is, and I actually heard things like, we don't want those kids on our campus. And I'm realizing, oh my goodness, I did not take enough time to do what I was saying in the earlier illustration of ensuring all stakeholders had a voice and an understanding and a shared direction. And I moved too quickly. Again, I had the support of the authorities. I
Right.
had even team support and belief of shared, but the community we were serving, they weren't on board. at least not all of them. There was a vocal segment that was not on board, and that was a hard lesson. Yeah, there was there was a lot of pain in that, and so since that time, I've tried to be far more careful and intentional that if where we're going is where we need to go, well, it might take us a year or two or three, right? You need to take the time and be in it for the long haul. And when we do, and again, when people feel like they've got a voice, and when that direction is clearly defined by shared values, and then that's also the rub, because it may be the direction of where the school is going is not a value
Mm.
of some of the folks who are there. And then we're back to Collins's bus, right?
Yeah.
Well, some people do need to get off the bus,
Mhm.
but we need as much as possible for the health of the community and the school. Bring them all along, and make sure you're giving time to get feedback loops for all the different stakeholder groups, give them opportunity for voice, and then you're far more likely to seek success. But I can confess I did not do that well earlier in my career.
I think we can all, as leaders, think back. And if we're being honest, we have moments, have experiences that we can share that we were in the same situation. And pain is a powerful motivator for change, right? So when you think back about that experience, what advice would you give the leaders that are listening in terms of knowing when you've spent enough time?
Well, I'm a bit of a data geek, Brandi,
Mhm.
right? You got to have measurables. You've got to know what the target is and how you're going to measure it. I'm a big supporter of SMART goals, been using those for years, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, or realistic, and time based. And I'm a big believer in short term goals. How do you build a culture of school improvement? Well, you set a lot of short goals. In the trust ed training, so how do you build trust and how do you rebuild trust?
Mhm.
Make a promise, keep it.
Yeah.
Make a promise, keep it. Make a promise, keep it. And all of those promises have measurables, right? So how do you know when you've been at it? Well, did we hit our target? Yeah.
Mhm.
And so at the front end, another tool that I use a lot in my work and with those I support are action plans. And you just need four basic elements of an effective action plan. One is first baseline. Where are we today? Just be authentic and transparent. Two is you need a SMART goal. Where do we want to be? Three, you got to articulate why we want to be there. I'm sure you're familiar with, like Simon Sinek's work, Start with Why. It is critical. You've got to be able to articulate the why. That's what makes it authentic. It's
Yeah.
just like in the classroom with kids. Kids have got to know why they're doing this learning, or it's not going to connect, right? So you got to have a why. And then fourth, you've got to have specific strategies of what you're going to do different tomorrow.
Mhm.
And you got to keep asking the how question. I learned this from Dave Horsager, who wrote The Trust Edge, also an excellent book. And is you got to keep asking how until you've got a specific step you're going to take tomorrow that's going to get you further to your goal. But those kind of action plans will answer the question that you're asking me. How
Yeah.
do you know when you're done? When
Yeah.
you've hit the target.
Absolutely. And I think that target, that action plan has to be visual. It has to be public. It has to be put out where people can consistently see that. And we're keeping it in front of the people that are implementing it and the people that are benefiting from it. And then the other piece of that I'll add is celebrating the wins.
Yes.
The small wins and the big wins along the way, because, Albert Bandura talks about the four sources of self-efficacy. And having those mastery experiences and reinforcing those and sharing those and celebrating those, it really helps people believe that they can.
Well, and that whole concept of you celebrate the exemplar, right? It's like, okay, we've already got somebody in our team that's doing this.
Yeah.
Let's make sure that's known and acknowledged. Keep putting in front of folks. This is a win. Pardon me. This is where we want to go, and it should never be uh, corrective.
Mm.
Right? It's like that. It just doesn't work. When you're trying to get a community to embrace a best practice or a new, it has to be, no, this is how we build towards supporting kids better. This
Right.
is how we go to supporting each other better.
Mhm.
It can't be, no, you got to do this because this is what the office says we need to be doing.
It doesn't
That
work.
doesn't motivate anybody. Yeah.
And, you've done so much incredible work throughout your career. You've written the book that you're going to share about in a little bit. You have worked with countless schools, both in the United States and internationally. And I'm just curious right now, Toby, is there anything that you're working on, a passion project maybe, that you'd like to share?
I want to get back to writing again. I had a flurry of one good thing about pandemic time was
Mhm.
it provided more time for writing, and I'd like to get back to that. The book came out in 21, and really, I finished it up while we were in the pandemic, and even a number of the things I really would love to update. So kind of a current passion is I'd love to find some time to go back and do an update on the book. I've had numerous, and this isn't about me necessarily, but I've been flattered. I've had numerous invites to do additional articles for a number of publications, and I'd really like to get back to that. And do that. It's just finding the time. I've been so blessed by how the trusted framework has just helped so many folks, and I've got so many stories now that I can tell. I'd like to implement those, into an updated edition of the book, and actually been looking at a series of smaller books that could be personalized to applying the framework to specific levels of education or to specific types of of schools and operations. Another ongoing passion, though, is the work I'm doing, especially with school leaders in distress and developing areas. That's been something I've been honored to be a part of for years. And for confidentiality, I won't mention their names, but or the schools. But when you think about trying to operate a quality school in a distressed area, or think war zone, think government instability, really, really challenging. And, and I love working with schools here in the States as well. But by comparison, we don't have any problems, not the big, but we're pretty confident school will open today. We're pretty confident people will be able to show up for work. But there are parts of the world where you don't know if the lights are going to turn on. You don't know if you're going to have power. You don't know if the roads are going to be open. You don't know if you can get a full roster of faculty and staff on campus that day just to meet the needs of the kids. And when you're operating a school in those kind of situations, really, really challenging. And it's been an honor to walk alongside those folks. I certainly don't have all the answers, but I think I've had the opportunity, and because of the exposure with so many schools, it's really a lot of the work is just helping with the brainstorming of, have we thought about this? Could this work in that scenario? Have you tried thinking out of the box over here? And that has been and continues to be a passion of mine.
Yeah. And none of us have all of the answers, but working together there's so much power in that. There's so much to be grateful for when we can come alongside one another and support one another and help one another to pave a better future for our children, whether it's here or abroad. And I love that you talk about your international work, because talk about mindset. We think we have it tough in the United States as school leaders, and it is hard work. Don't get me wrong. It is incredibly difficult work. And there were days that, I would sit at my desk and cry because I was so frustrated. And I know I've worked with leaders through coaching. They've been in the same spot. But I don't think we think about what other people have it like, especially abroad. So I'm glad you brought that up. That mindset piece is very powerful. And we are very blessed in the United States. Yeah,
Indeed, we are.
for sure. So, Toby, if you could, can you just give a little synopsis of your book and where the listeners can go to find your book?
The work and the research came down to really one major finding, and that is this: the number one indicator of successful schools is trusted leadership. And it was interesting. It didn't matter how we define success, that finding still held true. So if you define school success as student achievement levels, you look at the schools where students are achieving to the highest level, you will also find the highest levels of trusted leadership. You look at faculty and staff retention as a mark of success. Well, in the schools where they are retaining quality faculty and staff, What do you also have? The most trusted leaders. When you look at volunteerism and community support, and I could go on and on. We did about 5 different looks at school success, and the finding held true. Trusted leadership, number one indicator. Well, then you have to look at, well, how do you assess it? How do you know you're trusted, right? So then we worked on developing basically a research-based assessment tool. And first we had to define, obviously, what are the components of trust? And that's where, again, this bridge illustration helps, because we actually discovered there are basically 6 components of trusted leadership that need to be in place for trust to be there. And that also led then to being able to, okay, then these are the competencies and skill sets. And actually always give credit to Bob Marzano and his team, because I'm sitting on their shoulders. Their team had identified 21 what they called responsibilities of school leaders, that were directly tied to student success. And then their studies, actually, they did a meta-analysis, but there have been two subsequently over the last 2 decades that have reinforced what we already knew. But then my work was connecting those competencies and skill sets to these 6 components of trust. And so basically the trusted framework it's an assessment tool of where am I in my level of trusted leadership. And then based on the results of that assessment, what are the specific steps I can take to ensure those trust levels are developed? And we've seen just amazing school improvement initiatives, all really as a result to ensuring got high levels of trust. 70% of school improvement initiatives fail. That stat has held for decades now, and it's still true. It's also true, by the way, in the corporate sector. 70% of new businesses fail. But when you look in the school side, what is it about those 30%? What are they doing right? It's all about implementation. And when you look at, well, what is it about the implementation? It's all about leadership. So here's the thing is when you spend time, energy, resources to ensure that there are high levels of trust between the administration and the faculty and staff, that's the key relationship. Others also those ancillary relationships of students, parents, community. But the key relationship is between the school leaders and the employees. When you ensure that that is solid, it's like magic. All kinds of other wonderful things just start happening. And people get more engaged. You see innovation. Schools begin to blossom because teachers feel supported. They feel trusted and empowered. So the number one issue that schools must ensure is healthy is high levels of trust between the administration and the teachers. And if they're not spending time and energy there, it doesn't matter what the initiative is. Long term, it's not going to work. And we've seen that over and over again. So that's what the book is about. That's what the framework and the training's about. They can find the book on Amazon, and they can find me on LinkedIn. If you just Google Dr. Toby Travis Trust Ed, you'll find it.
So powerful, though, when you think about the core of that, it goes back to the importance of connection, the importance of knowing that you matter, knowing that you're valued, and being connected. And in my work coaching leaders, when I have experienced that as a school leader, when leaders share with me their experiences, sometimes they'll say, I'm really blessed to lead the school that I'm leading. And then when you really dig into that, the reason they feel that way is because there is trust and there is connection and there's mutual positive regard for both the leader and the teacher or the staff member or whatever the role is. So it's powerful work, Toby, very powerful.
It is. I got a buddy of mine that is a family counselor and does a lot of marriage counseling, and it talks about the key elements of love and respect, and respect. And I see that in our work as well, even though it's not a romance, right? It's not, but you've got to have authentic care and respect for those you're working with, even when you disagree. In fact, even more important when you disagree is there needs to be that authentic care. It's part of what we see in the larger culture that has just fallen apart in the United States and in other parts of the world, where people are villainizing those they disagree with. And it's like, that is not going to get us to a better place.
It's not. And when there is that breakdown, in my experience, what fuels the breakdown is fear, uncertainty, overwhelm, frustration. But if you choose love over fear, love wins every time. And you
Every
don't
time.
have to call it love. It could be care
Right.
or it could be compassion or whatever. But at the core, it's love. It's love for each other.
Yeah.
Um, and I
And
believe
respect. Yeah.
definitely treating each other with the respect, the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. One of the first things we learned, right, growing up. But it's very, very true and very important to always remember that we need to love and respect the people that we work with, the people that we work for, the people that work for us, and we're going to get a lot further in our mission and our impact is going to be greater. So, what is giving you hope in the world today?
Actually, quite a number of things, but I think a specific example to the context of what we're trying to encourage folks in the world of education is I am seeing the reformation of education today in so many ways that for decades we dreamed about, we talked about it. And again, I go back to a pandemic in some ways actually really helped us a lot. I know there were schools that closed and there was lots of mistakes that happened. But it shook up the game, right? We had to figure it out differently. And excuse me, and that has continued. And I'm hopeful and I'm encouraged daily, almost daily. I'm in communication with people who are really being student centered in their thinking about what should education really look like rather than system centered.
Mhm.
And it's been said, we need to be designing educational platforms and delivery, if you look at it that way, for a student's future, not our past. What I've resonate even more with this and understanding that the education is organic. We're not producing widgets here, right?
Right.
But it has been systematized so much
Mhm.
for the sake of management and accountability over the years that we've forgotten that this is in the Christian world we'd call it discipleship, right? In the secular world we'd call it apprenticeship, right? It's like this, and it's in its best form. It's us pouring our lives into these young people to help them so that they can pour their lives into others. That's what education really should be about, not about ticking a bunch of boxes about how many AP classes did you get and what's your SAT score. And I get it, university trajectory is important, but it's not all important, right? We shouldn't just be college prep, we should be life prep. And it gives me hope when I see so many who have really got that vision in their minds and that understanding that we don't need to stick to this, 100-plus-year-old traditional system. There are ways that we can approach supporting these kids for their future in relevant, authentic ways. So when I have conversations with schools that are entirely project based, right? Or you see schools that they're doing flexible models where kids are online 2 days a week and in class 3 days a week. Just there's so many examples we can look at, but that gives me hope. It's like, okay, we know the old system is probably the worst form of
Right.
quality education, and we're finally ready to shake the system off. Let's retool, let's rethink based on what's really best for kids and for their future rather than what's convenient for us to measure and to operate.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to what we were talking about before, love, that relationship, the importance of pouring in to the people that we are serving and working with. And it's a beautiful thing when it's done right. And that is something to be very hopeful for. If you're listening to this podcast today, I just want to encourage you to go over to Amazon and check out Dr. Toby Travis's book, Trust Ed. He has built a framework that is powerful for empowering leaders. Toby, I am grateful that you came on the show today. So thank you for your time and for your wisdom and your insight. I look forward to staying connected with you.
My pleasure, my pleasure, Brandy, and thank you for the work you're doing. I love the hope framework as well. I mean that it is critical that we live with vision and encouragement and gratitude. So, no, thank you very, very much for making me aware of the work that you're doing. And if there's ever anything I can do to help and encourage, I'm very, very honored to do so.
Thank you. That's a wrap for today's episode of Lead with Hope. Remember, the world needs your leadership, and change starts with you. Fuel your life with hope, embrace your purpose, and shine your light for others. If this episode inspired you, I'd be so grateful if you could take a moment to give us a 5-star rating and share it. Every review helps spread hope and empowers more leaders to rise. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep leading with hope.